Hello, everyone. I'm Jen Sanasie here with Renato Mariotti, and we are going to break down the latest and greatest in crypto regulation and policy for you. We are here every other week across CoinDesk's socials. Renato, what's going on? What have you been up to?
Wow, quite a bit. I've been pretty busy. I really enjoyed being with you at Consensus. Met with a lot of folks there. Had a lot of really interesting conversations about the legislation that we've had in Congress, about where things are heading. And since that time, it's just been busy from passage of the stablecoin to resignations of almost seems like almost every CFTC commissioner.
Mhm.
Stay tuned on that. And a lot of busy stuff in the state front between an Illinois crypto bill that is going to completion and getting passed this week, to all sorts of actions at the AG level. So I've been very busy.
Yeah, Renato, you and I were live from Consensus, and I gotta give Pi Network a shout out. I see someone has written Pi Network in the chat below this video because they really spammed us during Consensus. We got a lot of people watching our videos because of Pi Network. So, what's up, guys? Like you said, I am, like we say every second week when you and I meet here, there's just so much to cover. Things are moving so quickly and they have such an implication on so much that's happening in the industry. And so it's always wonderful to meet with you here every other week. I want to remind our audience that we are live across CoinDesk socials. That means you have the opportunity to engage with us and engage with our guests. So if you have any questions or comments, leave those down below the video and we will try to get to them throughout the show. Now, let's get to our first guest here. Renato, as you mentioned, we have CFTC commissioners. Four of them have said that they are planning to step down. One of those members is CFTC Commissioner Kristin Johnson, who says that she will leave later this year. Commissioner Johnson joins the show now. Hello.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Jen and Renato. Excited to be here and on the heels of Consensus, no less. So I'm enjoying all the good vibes that you guys brought back with you.
We are riding the energy. We are riding the vibes. Now, Commissioner, I want to just start here for our audience. Like we mentioned at the top of the show, four CFTC commissioners have said that they will be leaving in days or months. You are one of those folks. It has really taken over the headlines. Just make sense of this for us. Is this something unusual?
Well, thanks so much, Jen, for having me. I'll share at the outset the views I'm sharing are my own and not those of the commissioners, commission staff, or others in the administration. Turnover at the top of an administration is pretty common. And in fact, one of my fellow commissioners and I had both been nominated for new posts in the previous administration as of last summer. So we both sat together on a panel at Citi Banking for elevation to those posts. Unfortunately, the elevation to service and treasury as assistant secretary for financial institutions didn't work out for me, but it was an amazing process. It's always a great opportunity to be in public service. And I really came to this sort of as the White House selected me based on some work I was doing in secondary market trading for cryptocurrency in early days, right? So more than almost 10 years ago, or roughly about 10 years ago, I think we all began to think a little bit more about what might be happening in terms of really innovative technologies. And as of a particular a white paper published in the launch of Bitcoin, I think a few of us dove in pretty heavily. And as an academic, I had the great opportunity to just explore not just sort of initial coin offerings, but immediately think about secondary market trading. And that's kind of, I think, how I got tapped to join the CFTC and a service that I hope before I leave the commission, I'm able to provide some of the guidance and support that the markets need to effectively operate in a manner that ensures their stability, longevity, and enhances the integrity of markets.
So, just to follow up a little bit on something Jen asked, a lot of people are concerned at this point because we're down to two commissioners. And both of you have indicated you'll be stepping down. There's a prospect that we're going to have one commissioner soon. There will be no quorum. How is this going to impact not only the ability of the CFTC to do business for the on behalf of the American people, but also how is that going to impact some new regulatory work that is anticipated from the commission, like a prediction markets framework, as well as potential rulemaking if we have a market structure bill that passes?
Thanks, Renato. There are a lot of questions packed into that one question. And I'm not a litigator. I was a transactional lawyer, but I definitely think that's a compound question if we were in trial court. What I'm going to share with you from the outset is what's fantastic about our democracy and the institutions that serve our democracy well, like the Commodity Futures Trading Commission or the Securities Exchange Commission, is that we produce the best of the best in terms of regulation and oversight globally. It is one of the reasons that our markets are the deepest and most liquid in the world. It's also one of the reasons why people flock to our markets to raise capital or to engage in derivatives transactions from all corners of the earth. And so with that, what I want to hope to signal is that we have sort of a living, breathing body of institutions that are continuously engaged. I'm hopeful with the guidance and direction of Congress and the White House in developing the very best kinds of regulatory and oversight policies. It's absolutely the case that we are engaged in a continuous, robust dialogue about what those policies look like and what they mean. What is a security? What is a commodity? How do we interpret that investment contract definition under the Supreme Court's 1946 decision in SEC versus Howey? All of these great things actually contribute to making our markets and our regulatory oversight something that is exported around the world. So in the context of our commission, yes, we will see the departure of two of our colleagues at the commission this week. At the end of the week, Commissioner Summer Mersinger is headed to lead the Blockchain Association, which has been an association I've spent a lot of time with. Kristin Smith and I know one another well. I invited her to join my advisory committee, the one I sponsor and support at the CFTC. I've already mentioned to Commissioner Mersinger, I expect and anticipate continued engagement and support from Blockchain Association because we need those views at our commission with respect to any number of matters that relate to how we think about markets. And so we'll have that with Commissioner Mersinger's departure as well as Commissioner Goldsmith Romero's departure as of the end of this week. But we've had a commission that functions with two commissioners historically in a number of instances. So you'll think back to Chris Giancarlo's service as chair at the early days of his leadership of the CFTC. Former chairman Chris Giancarlo did an exceptional job engaging with Sharon Bowen, who's now chair of the New York Stock Exchange Board of Directors. They did an excellent job, I think, guiding the ship to the point of Congress's ability to confirm additional commissioners to serve. And I'm hopeful that we'll see a very similar outcome here. We already have a nominee for the chair for the CFTC in Brian Quintens. And Brian has a history of being at the commission and working well with commissioners. And my goal and desire in public service is truly to be in every way possible of assistance to the American economy, to our market participants, to the consumers and individual investors from institutional to retail level. That's really the passion that drove me to be part of the commission and to participate in public service. So as much as I can personally give, I really will. So I've been in conversations to help facilitate as long a window as possible in terms of my service. My term has expired, unfortunately, however, and so unless I were to be renominated, there really is a sort of closing window, if you will, in terms of how long I would be allowed to serve. So I'm mapping everything onto that and just doing all that I can in the days that remain to highlight how effectively the commission, the CFTC, and the SEC in collaboration can engage with derivatives markets, but also more broadly, crypto markets and other markets, Renato, that you mentioned, to ensure that our markets continue to be as efficient and safe as they have historically been.
Kristin, you're allowed to object to Renato's questions anytime you want on this show. Maybe we can add that in as a feature.
I object.
I want to ask you about the market structure bill. We talk about that a lot on this show. It outlines clear swim lanes for the CFTC and the SEC as we think about regulation in the space. I'm curious to hear your read on what's been outlined in the market structure bill and how you think the CFTC will be able to adapt to the guidelines should this get pushed through.
Thanks so much for that question, Jen. I think what I would share is the CFTC specifically, but the SEC as well, have both taken on significant mandates in recent decades in terms of financial markets oversight, and also taken on significant mandates where there are innovative technologies or innovative financial products that have entered our market. And I think what you would see is that we have a pretty awesome track record of seeing what is happening in the market and based on congressional guidance, creating the framework that really enables markets to flourish. One of the things I've said from the outset of my service is that I am technology agnostic, or at least technology neutral. My perspective is that the same risks that arise in the context of any market should be subject to the same oversight and regulation. I think what's great about congressional movement on any legislation in this space is that it will bring necessary clarity, both for regulators and for potentially regulated market participants. I think that clarity is important for those who are regulated in many contexts. One of them is to ensure compliance with potential regulation, even as they build out the infrastructure for their businesses. Another is fundraising and the ability to go to investors and say, hey, look, we have mapped our firm and our firm's operations onto what will likely be the regulatory infrastructure or oversight framework for our markets. So that means when Congress sort of puts pen to paper and the president's pen crosses the bill, signing his name on the signature line, that we can immediately have confidence that those market participants who would be subject to our oversight are able to successfully integrate themselves into our markets and smoothly continue their operations. I mean, one challenge is that many of these businesses are already in operation, so it's really helpful to hear from those businesses. But what I'll point out is I said very early on, and particularly lots in the fall of 2022 after FTX's collapse, that some basic foundational principles serve all businesses well. Risk management and corporate governance are critical parts of any business's success. So if you want to build a successful business in crypto markets or any other market, you have to have appropriate information channels, audit channels built in within your own internal networks to enable you to effectively surveil and oversee the operations of your individual firm. When we layer different products on, especially if the products are complex, having that foundation really can make a very big difference. So I think Congress is actually listening and watching and learning from what we've done before historically in terms of regulation, but also in terms of what businesses themselves are acknowledging might be helpful, might be useful, might be important as they begin to operate in a more domestic and broadly international space, offering some of the products and services in the crypto markets that they're offering. There are foundational questions that we always want to be thoughtful about. Are we AML and KYC compliant? Is there a board of directors overseeing the operations? Are there independent directors? Have we as an operation or as a firm taken into account conflicts of interest? How are we accounting for disclosure? These are foundational issues that you'll find, I believe, in any serious legislation designed to effectively order this market.
Well, Commissioner, I know we don't have unlimited time with you, but I was interested because you put out a statement when you were leaving, you were announcing your departure from the commission, that outlined a number of topics. I think anyone listening to you today can see you're a deep thinker on all sorts of issues related to financial markets. One thing you mentioned is that you're writing a couple of books. So I was interested what you're writing about, what you're interested in, and where you're going to be focused in the years ahead.
Oh, thanks so much, Renato. This is a great question. The books are focused on the integration of AI in financial markets and other parts of our markets more globally. They are co-authored projects that were launched a few years ago, and I've put them on hold for the period of time that I've been in service. I'll be excited to turn back to those works. I'd also highlight that I'm in Dallas today, if you couldn't have guessed, from Reunion Tower, just above my head in the backdrop. I'm here and will be participating in an event at the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank that's focused on agentic AI and cyber threats, among other issues in financial markets, mostly because I think these are issues that, to be quite honest with you, they are not partisan issues. They are critical issues that both sides of the aisle in oversight of our government are thoughtful about. So the integrity of our financial services system, the protection against cyber threats and cybersecurity concerns, alongside the introduction of increasingly complex AI models, moving beyond Gen AI to agentic AI, and thinking carefully about what that means for our markets and how our market participants are developing these technologies or relying on third-party service providers to develop these technologies that are integrated into their infrastructure. These are issues and questions I hope to be talking about for a very long time to come, but certainly are top of mind for the remainder of my time in service as a commissioner.
Commissioner, what keeps you up at night when you think about AI and financial markets?
So I'm going to go right to some concerns that arise in connection with agentic AI. So one of the challenges is synthetic data. So that leads to questions around data integrity. It leads to questions about data leakages. There are really hard issues regarding deep fakes and the highly persuasive deep fakes, both in terms of audio and visual and vocal confirmation. These are ways that we have historically verified identification in financial markets. So the potential for these deep fakes to lead to great concerns regarding how we facilitate transfers of funds, regarding how we ensure the integrity of systems, regarding the movement of monies, really is a critical question, like I said, that is not partisan in any way, but it's very important for all of us to be thoughtful about. So I'm here to help facilitate the adoption of responsible innovation in every way that makes sense in our markets. But I also want to support the market participants who are adopting these technologies and help them to ward off or overcome some of the threats as they battle the forces that are coming against them in the current market environments.
Commissioner, we will let you get back to it. A lot of important conversations to be had, I think, about some of the emerging technology that we talked about here. Thanks so much for joining the show.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I appreciate it.
That was CFTC Commissioner Kristin Johnson. All right, Renato, you and I are going to get right to it. I'm just going to remind our audience, if you are joining us, we are live across all of CoinDesk's socials. If you want to engage with us, ask a question, add some comments about regulation or policy stories that you've been following, you can add that right under the video and we'll try and get to it. Renato, you and I talk a lot about the bills that are making their way to hopefully fruition and hopefully soon. We've talked a lot about the Genius Act. We've talked a lot about market structure bill. We've talked a lot about what states are doing. And there've been some recent developments in Illinois. Talk to us about them.
So we've talked a little bit in the past, I think even a consensus, about crypto bill in Illinois that had a lot of people concerned. Basically, it's a bill that would require anyone engaged in digital asset business activity, which is extremely broad as defined in the bill, with any Illinois person, so anyone inside of Illinois, to register with the Illinois Department of Professional Regulation, which is IDFPR, Professional Financial Regulation. So it's the same organization that oversees beauticians, doctors, and nurses, and so on. And there's been a lot of folks in the industry trying to kill the bill, others trying to amend it. And this week, A16Z and a group of smaller shops that fashion themselves as the Illinois Blockchain Association were able to get some significant edits to this bill. And what they've essentially done is made it so that that this will be a burden on certain large players in the industry, like exchanges, but not on some of the smaller players who are the most concerned, people who are just investing in crypto, people who had small shops. There's very extensive changes, and so now A16Z and some of these others are actually throwing their support behind the bill, and I expect the amended bill to pass this week. What does that mean? Well, it's going to be very burdensome on exchanges like Coinbase. I think they are going to be hoping that the federal market structure bill passes and preempts this bill. If not, it seems like states like Illinois are going to be having a whole patchwork of regulations that are going to make things difficult for some of the large players in the crypto space.
Well, let's talk about that because it sounds like, from what you're telling me and from what I've read, it's more likely that this bill is passed before the market structure bill. And so, what does that mean for when the market structure bill is eventually passed, if it gets passed? And I'm going to ask a compound question now. And does this broad stroke language, is it put in bills like this? And I'm just asking you to kind of ponder this with me so that if regulators want to act on the language, they can, but they almost kind of understand that it's impossible to be completely compliant with everything that's outlined.
Well, you know what it does, Jen? It gives sweeping power to this agency, IDFPR, to create all sorts of rules and regulations, to launch investigations, to issue subpoenas and haul you in for testimony.
Mhm.
And so, what it could potentially end up meaning is that the sort of regulation by enforcement that we've talked about in the prior administration ends up occurring at a state by state level. It also means that they can impose all sorts of requirements, after you register, to provide information and to make certifications and so on. That'll put a burden on exchanges. Let's say Coinbase, for example, in the United States, that might have to register not only in Illinois but perhaps other states, and end up, instead of having one regulator, maybe the CFTC, to deal with, they end up having to deal with regulators all across the
Hmm.
country.
Hmm. Okay. And what is the likelihood that this passes and when? Like, how soon could we have this crypto bill?
I would say between 90 and 100% chance of passage this week.
Wow. So, okay, now last question here, Renato. So then what does this mean for big exchanges? Likelihood that this passes within days from now, right?
Mhm.
What does that mean for exchanges like Coinbase, like Kraken, who interact with folks in Illinois? Is it kind of all boots on the ground trying to comply with this new legislation?
Yeah, I think the reality is, unless, let's say, Coinbase and Kraken and others can kill this bill, which anything's possible in politics, I suppose, but doesn't look likely, then they're going to have to register in Illinois. They're going to get some Illinois lawyers, and they're going to spend a lot of time and expense trying to comply with Illinois law. And I imagine be even more motivated to get that market structure bill passed in Congress.
All right. Well, we will continue to follow what's happening in Illinois. We'll continue discussing it right here on the show. So we will have updates, I'm sure, for you in 2 weeks from now on what's going on in Illinois and then what's going on at the federal level as well. Now, Renato, the last story that we're discussing today is the DOJ's case against Tornado Cash developer Roman Storm. The latest development here was a letter filed recently from Roman's defense attorneys saying recent disclosures in another similar case have raised concerns that prosecutors misled the judge or were otherwise playing fast and loose. Break this down for all of us non-lawyer minds. What does this mean?
Okay, so I will just say, as somebody who has been both a federal prosecutor and a criminal defense attorney, I've been spending my time over the last decade fighting the government and making similar allegations. You're at a tremendous disadvantage when you're in the defense side. I mean, the government usually has all the cards, and the prosecutors, have a lot of advantages. One of the things that the defense has, of course, is the ability to raise questions and lodge issues. And it's, I'd say, not surprising that the defense team here has some very capable, well-known, I would say, defense counsel, is trying to challenge disclosures made by the government. It's very important on the defense side to knock the prosecution down a peg. Because in court, the judge assumes or presumes that the prosecution has their stuff together, and they know what they're doing, and they're on the side of truth, justice, and the American way. And so it's always important to do that. And I think the defense is usually in the strongest position to do that when they're talking about disclosures and evidence that's been withheld and things like that. So that's often a defense motion you see in well litigated cases.
Okay, so business as usual, right?
Right.
We're
Pretty
going to hear
much.
from the defense as much as I'm sure is possible before the trial begins in July. Now, my question here for you is, a lot of people in the industry are watching this trial closely. A lot of firms in the industry and big thought leaders like Vitalik Buterin supporting Roman Storm's defense financially. What happens if the DOJ wins this case against Roman Storm? What does that mean for innovation in the United States? Does it mean anything?
Well, the fear that people have, just to articulate that, right, is that you're criminalizing software development, right? I
Hmm.
think you and I have discussed that a little bit offline. And that is a legitimate concern. I had represented a software developer in a case against the DOJ, and that was the concern there. He wasn't the one engaged in the criminal activity. He's just creating tools, right? So, if you're just creating a hammer, you're not responsible for someone bludgeoning someone else over the head with the hammer, so to speak. Um, there is, I think that is a legitimate concern. I think the reason that I was able to beat the DOJ in that case, but that this case is more challenging, is that it's harder to articulate what the legitimate uses are for the crypto mixer. And I think the DOJ here in the Southern District of New York is going to take on that issue very directly. And they are alleging that the defendants knew that there was all sorts of illicit proceeds that were running through Tornado Cash, including sort of North Korean, stolen Bitcoin and so forth. Whether that, I don't know whether that's true or not. They're just allegations. The government's got to prove all that beyond a reasonable doubt. But a jury is not going to like that stuff. And it's going to be harder for the defense to articulate why you need anonymized transactions when the point of a blockchain is so that things aren't anonymized. And so, why use a blockchain and have an anonymity, which is sort of cuts against the idea of the blockchain?
And so I've heard both sides of this argument, right? And I think that the argument to that would be, you know, Tornado Cash is a privacy tool. It's to protect your transactions, much like I can't go to your bank account, Renato, and see the transactions that you're making. Tornado Cash is there to kind of provide a similar solution in an environment that is more open than the financial environment that came before it. Do you think that stands up in a trial like this, or is able to convince a jury to see the other side?
I don't know all the evidence,
Mhm.
but I'm skeptical that a jury is going to find that compelling. Jurors usually side with the government anyway. I'll just tell you, as somebody who's gone up against the government quite a bit, they tend to think the government's right, and they're not going to like what's going on here. I'm sure given some of the allegations in the indictment, that the government's going to talk about all the North Korean bad guys and so forth. No one's going to like that in the jury. But I think that, there are all sorts of ways to engage in private transactions, right? You just named them, right? Like one. I mean, most of our financial transactions are private. The reason you go to crypto is actually so you have visibility, right? Regarding the transactions as part of, I think, the feature of it. I think that I think that even if you take credit what you just said, I think another problem is going to be for the defendants here is the allegation, whether they can prove it or not, I don't know. But if the government's able to prove that they knew that there was illicit money going through this, that's hard. And a jury's going to have trouble going away from that. I mean, there are, for example, an analogous type of business, Jen, are these email providers that have like encrypted email and advertise that they don't cooperate with law enforcement and all of this sort of stuff for your privacy. Well, you could argue that that's totally legitimate service, but if the government can prove that they're knowingly aiding people who are engaged in criminal activity, then it becomes harder, and that knowledge is, I think, a really key element for the government.
Okay, and so I'm kind of going to ask something I already asked, but in a different way. I want you to drive it home here for me. If the DOJ wins, is precedent set in some way, because we don't have market structure bill yet, where now anyone who's building something that maybe could enable someone to do something bad is now a target, or at the very least makes them afraid, makes them want to take their innovation overseas?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really smart question, and I maybe I didn't answer it well enough the first time.
Mhm.
Here's what I would say: that if you're if you have or are creating a crypto mixer company, you have a very significant risk. You have a risk here, a criminal risk. You have potential regulatory risks. You have potential criminal risks at the state level. You have potential litigation risks from others, and so forth. I would say there's a lot of you should be cautious and concerned about those risks. If there's a win here, that risk is heightened because it may embolden prosecutors, whether in this administration, I don't know, but perhaps in a future administration or at the state level to prosecute cases like this. But I will say this, Jen, even if the defense wins in this particular case because they're just good lawyers or they can outduel the DOJ, that doesn't, I think, do away with some of those risks that I talked about a minute ago. And I would still consider this to be a business model that has to be careful about the risks that they face, both in criminal and civil liability.
So the risks are more, what it's sounding like, applied to that type of business, maybe not more generally applied to anyone developing anything in crypto.
I think that's right.
Yeah. All right. And I guess the last thing I wanted to hear your thoughts on this topic was, are you surprised that the DOJ is moving forward with this? And I ask you that because just months ago, I believe that crypto task force that the DOJ had was dismantled. They were really told to deprioritize crypto related enforcement. And we're seeing this kind of moving ahead full steam. I can imagine by your previous answers that it has to do with the type of business and probably the evidence that the government has.
Right. I don't know the evidence,
Mhm.
and so I keep bracketing that. Okay.
I
I'm looking
know.
at the allegations that the government's made. But a difference between this and a lot of the other enforcement matters is that this is a criminal indictment that's based, really on actual harm to real victims, which is something that the Trump administration has really emphasized, right? Is that harm to victims is important. Like I mentioned the North Korean allegations, that's something that is the sort of thing that I imagine some folks in the Justice Department right now, don't want to be seen as supporting and want to be seen as being tough on. And, given that the administration has been um, friendly towards and facilitating the growth of the crypto space, I think it's even more important when there are actual criminals and wrongdoers, obviously in this case just alleged and not proven, that the government is going to do, what it can to throw the books at those people.
All right, well, we will leave it there. Like I said before, we'll continue following the case and bring you all the updates. Renato, that's a wrap on another great show. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, and to everyone who's watching us, we will be back ahead of the SEC roundtable on June 9th for a little bit of a pregame. Renato and I will be joined by some of our favorite guests to talk about progress at the SEC and give you a little preview as to what we expect to happen at the roundtable on that day. So tune in on June 9th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time.